Hi, everyone. Welcome to a bonus episode of Building Connection. I have another super special guest. He is the Consul General of Javier Diaz de Leon. He's the Consul General of the Consulate of Mexico in Atlanta, in the United States of America. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He's going to introduce himself. He's here with us because we want his input about Mexico's Independence Day. September is a very special month for Mexicans and the diaspora around the world as well. So our guest brings a wealth of experience from his career in the Mexican Foreign Service. So we're going to explore the roots and contemporary celebrations of this important national holiday. Javier has a robust career in the Mexican Foreign Service since 1991. That's a very long career, Javier. So we're very thrilled to have you here with us today. Like I said, he's currently the Consul General of Mexico in Atlanta. His career spans between various positions, including Deputy Consul General in San Diego and New York, and the head of Office for Migration and Hispanic Affairs. Javier, can you tell us a little bit about you? Introduce yourself. Tell us about your role and a little bit about your fascinating career trajectory. I think our audience would like to know that.
Thank you, Monica. First of all, very thankful for the opportunity and for the invitation to participate in your podcast. I've heard some of your previous efforts, your previous transmissions, and I find it very fresh, very useful, probably an opportunity to provide a lot of information. In terms of myself, yes, I am a career diplomat, like you very well say. I've been doing this for over 30 years. As a Mexican diplomat representing Mexico in a role as a career member of the diplomatic service. And my career has been very USA focused during most of my career. During all that span of time that I've just mentioned, the only exception in terms of the postings I've had that are not US related was way back at the beginning. My first diplomatic posting overseas was at the Mexican embassy in Australia.
Oh, really far away.
The other side of the world. But in many ways, and it's one of the culturally, now we're talking about culture and that sort of thing, I was found it very curious because we were at the other side of the world, but culturally, of course, it's a very Western and European with a European heritage in terms of institutions. So in that sense, it didn't feel that foreign. But of course, there's a lot of local flora and fauna that is very different, of course, to anything in the world. So it's a great experience. But coming back, so besides that experience in Australia, way at the beginning of my career, most of my career, like you already kind of mentioned, has been focused in the United States. I was posted in San Diego, posted in New York. I worked at the Mexican Embassy in Washington. That's where I was the head of Hispanic affairs at the Mexican Embassy in Washington, D.C. I've been also a Consul General of Mexico in Raleigh, North Carolina, and now here in Atlanta. So counting this current position in Atlanta, this is my fifth position as a diplomat in the U.S. during my career. That's over 20 years. So it's been a lot of time in the United States, and it's been a great experience. And one of the things I always say to people in Mexico, whether it's in government or non-government, is that sometimes I think that there's always a little bit of that's part of what has to do with doing this kind of job in terms of exporting and promoting and talking about our country. Mexico, for example, Mexico is a very diverse country, and it's got, when you say Mexico, probably the next question would be, where in Mexico are you talking about? Because of course, right. The Pacific, the Gulf, the South, the North, they're all different Mexicos. They're all Mexico, but there are different Mexicos. What a lot of people don't understand in Mexico sometimes is that probably I'm pretty convinced that the same applies to the United States. So in many ways, when they say, well, yeah, I've only in my career, I've only been in two countries, which is Australia and the United States. In many ways, by serving, for example, in California and then serving in New York, and now in the past few years, let me point out, I've been in the South, North Carolina, and now Georgia. I think personally, in many ways, that those are three different countries too.
Right.
They have very distinct local cultures. California, the Northeast and the American South. And in many ways, of course, it's all the United States, but realities and demographics are very different in all three places, economics, etc., etc. So in many ways, it's three very different positions. In a sense, that's what it is. I am, of course, very proud of my Mexican heritage. I am married. I have my wife with me and my two children. They don't
How
consider
old are they?
I don't think they consider themselves children,
No.
but to me, they're children.
Yeah, they are.
They are 29 and 27.
Oh God, yeah, they're not children, Javier, anymore.
Yeah, to me they are, and there's I'm very fortunate because they're here in Atlanta with us. One of them still lives with us, and the other one is now independent. She's a lawyer, but she's also a lawyer here in Georgia. She's an accredited lawyer, passed the bar and all that. She works in a law firm
Wow.
here, and so we're all together here in Atlanta at this point. And for a diplomat, that's very lucky. That's not
How is it?
something very common. Well, because the nature of the job involves that we move around. We move
Yes,
around
a lot.
usually a lot, and when that happens and your children grow up, there's a point in which naturally they won't follow you to the next posting. They probably go back to Mexico, or maybe they stay in the current posting. This is probably what will be the case in my case when I leave Atlanta, which of course will certainly happen in the future. When that happens, my daughter is going to stay here. She's already got her own thing going. She has her own career and she has her own independent immigration status here in the United States, not related to me, to my diplomatic status. So she's going to stay in Atlanta, whatever happens. So I'm enjoying every moment, every day in which the whole family is together in the same city. It won't happen for long.
I would say you're very fortunate to have your family with you. Because like you said, it must be, so I don't have a diplomatic career. I'm an academic and I have moved many times. I've lived in Hong Kong and Germany, and I lived in the US for a while, and my son was born in Boston. Then I moved back to the UK, and it's hard. It's hard, and it's good to have your family with you. I'm curious if you celebrate with them El Grito or the Mexico's Independence Day. And after all these years of moving around and living in these amazing places you have mentioned, do you still get excited? Do you still look forward to it? To that things at midnight and just shout and Viva Mexico and all of that?
I would probably say that every Mexican gets excited about it.
No doubt.
What has changed throughout the years, me, of course, is the nature of my role in those celebrations. Start of my career when I was, a young diplomat in Australia, first posting in San Diego when I was deputy consul general, not the consul general. Role was more like supporting my job. My boss would hold the celebrations over there, and so I was, and of course, and the way in which I participated in those things was a lot more support. At the years, I started getting more involved, particularly when I moved into postings in the United States, where the consulate, where it was in San Diego and later in New York, etc. The number of events that go on, that is something that around Mexican Independence Day is huge. It's enormous. Some people in Mexico think sometimes that, the event is the event that the consulates do. I mean, consulates are part of it, celebrations, yes, but the community doesn't care. They just do their own events, and that's great. I'm not saying any criticism. I think it's wonderful because the people in the community want to celebrate it. So events that are organized, for example, by community groups, events that are organized by radio stations or television stations all over the United States are very, very common. So there's just a sheer number of events that are going on during the month of September, particularly, of course, during the second week of September, usually are so many that the Consul General, whether it's the Consul General or the ambassador or who is the head of the diplomatic office in that certain city in the United States, is not able to be in all of them at the same time.
Of course not. Yeah.
So that means that he or she has to delegate and ask some of the other people in the staff to cover, to represent the consulate in events that are being organized by the community. So that's what my first experience was in San Diego in that role, because there was a very I think a beautiful tradition of a Grito celebration in very near to the border in South California. And it was an event in a small city, San Isidro, California, and they would hold their event, and I would I started going there. My children were very young, and they would come with me, and I thought it was also I love the idea of having them, be present and live the experience of a celebration with all the protocol for the grito and the arenga and everything that goes around that, and looking at their father do something like that, and
Yeah.
that was my first experience about that in the very early 2000s, probably around 2002, 2001, maybe. So over 20 years ago. And it has evolved. It has evolved in many ways. Of course, my
Yeah.
role has evolved. So the first time I, as a consul general, did that was in North Carolina. About
Mhm.
several years later, and of course, then the role is very different. But I always throughout the years want to uh, involve my family, my wife, and my children to be to be present. Not because I want them to see me. That I don't think they are particularly excited to look at their father do things like that. You see all this.
You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. And I always say, yeah, yeah, it runs very deep. I don't know if your wife is Mexican, but if
Yes,
one of
yes.
your, oh, okay, I was going to say, if one of your parents is Mexican, you're Mexican.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It runs very deep as well. What is your favorite part of that of Grito? Is there a specific thing that you really look forward? For me, is the storytelling. Why are we doing this? Who actually did the first Grito? Father Hidalgo with the bell. I love that part, and I love to share this with my son, who is 10 years old. But what is your favorite part? So some
Well,
people say,
it's
"Oh, is it that storytelling side?"
I think it's a very. I think I agree with you. It involves a lot. I think my favorite part is looking at the reaction to the people, at the faces of the people in the crowd. Some of the events that I have been fortunate enough to participate in, both in the Carolinas and now here in the South, both I've done it in North Carolina, I've done it in Georgia, I've done it in Nashville, Tennessee, I've done it also in Alabama, and it
Mhm.
follows a certain pattern, of course.
Yeah.
So you start, and there's the flag comes into the scenario with a marching band, and the marching band delivers the flag, and then you go into the larenga, as we say in
Mhm.
Spanish, which all this mentioning of Viva and mentioning the heroes of Mexican
Yeah.
independence one by one, etc. And then, of course, you finish with Viva Mexico, wave the flag, and then the next Mexican national anthem. I think that my favorite part is usually for two reasons. The part when I'm finished and the arenga has been done, Viva Mexico has been done, and I'm
Mhm.
holding the flag and I'm singing the Mexican anthem in front of the crowd for two reasons. One, because I went through the arenga. Sometimes my throat resents it,
Oh wow.
because one of the things I really believe, I think that almost every Mexican has a memory of watching El Grito, whether it's on television or in the past, and seeing someone do the Grito. In my mind, I remember comments from family members and things like that I would always remember that we would have the expectation for El Grito to be done in a certain way. Mostly people wanted to be strong, to wanted to, a strong delivery. That's what I try to do. Sometimes I lose my voice. It has
Right.
happened. It has happened. But so
I
again, so
guess you
come like,
practice, don't you?
yeah. I
You
mean,
practice ahead
I
and
scheduled too many. There was once a few years ago when I think three gritos were scheduled on the same day, and by the day it was a Sunday. So by
Mhm.
Monday I had no voice. Of course, people in the office were very happy that I didn't have a voice.
I yes, that's funny.
But yeah, I'm kind of trying to come back to. See, I told
Get
you
to the point.
I
Yeah,
go
the
off, I go
favorite
off
part.
the start.
That's
So I
fine.
come back, and so when I'm singing the national anthem and you look at the crowd, several times I've seen people that are very moved. I mean, deeply moved
Emotional.
in the crowd, and you see
Yeah.
them, and you see some of them who are singing the national anthem, looking at that. They just did the whole arenga and the Viva Mexico and all that, and you see the emotion in their faces. And when I see that happens, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens often. That to me brings me a sense of done, job well done,
Yes.
satisfaction.
And I
Yeah.
guess you've seen it consistently across all these places you show up to do this. Obviously, I've never done it, and that's a diplomat's job, right? To show up and represent. So you got that perspective. You are watching the audience getting really emotional. That's really powerful, because in that moment I'm just experiencing, I'm not looking at other people. But it's very interesting to hear this from you. I think, yeah, like I said, it runs very deep. Okay, I thought you were going to say, oh, the food, because most people tell me I love the pozole and I love the
Well, that is
tacos.
after the Grito, the food, etc. But I like food all year long. So also it's not
Yes.
just
Well, I live in the UK, so for me it's a bit more difficult to have access to good Mexican food. I suffer. Let me
oh,
tell you, it's hard not to have tacos and this delicious food so available. Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people will relate to you, to that. What is your favorite part? But I want to ask you a question about, I think you mentioned it a little bit in your answer. How have you seen Mexican culture in general evolve across the lifespan of your career internationally? Do you think the perception of Mexico abroad has remained the same, or has it changed, and how has it changed? And if it has remained the same, why has it? I just want your opinion.
no, I mean the short answer is definitely no. I mean it has certainly evolved. It always evolves. And it
Yeah.
has evolved in many ways. And of course, every evolution is complex and it responds to different factors. I would say, in general, I would say, personally think that the evolution has been positive. In some issues, you could have some debate. We could have some conversation or debate about it. But certainly, for example, when working, for example, for so many years, for example, here in the United States, we started learning or started seeing, and when you live in the UK and you've lived abroad for a long time, so this is not only a diplomat. I think any Mexican who lives outside of our country for a long time starts being and looking with a very strong interest how we are perceived by
Yeah.
others outside of our country. And that perception can sometimes not be very accurate in many ways. And that includes their perception of Mexican culture.
Yeah.
So I think there's good news and bad news. I mean, the good news from my perspective is that Mexican culture is a tremendous, tremendous asset to the country.
Mhm.
We are a country that has a tremendous reputation all over the world, and we are a cultural powerhouse in terms of of course, our artistic expressions, in terms of our pre-Hispanic or millenary culture and what they represent, in terms, of course, of our gastronomy, film, art, music, etc. Whatever you mention, Mexico is a powerhouse. Of course, I'm a little biased, but I strongly feel about it. But anywhere in the world, if you ask people about Mexico, usually they will have something they know. At the very least, they will know tacos. At the very
Definitely.
least.
Definitely.
So that's a good thing in a sense. The not so good thing is that many times their perception of what Mexican culture is, whether it's food or especially in the case of food, I would argue, but it might not be only that, is very stereotyped. And many times it's stereotyped is on a wrong perception. When talking about this, for example, I love to quote Anthony Bourdain. He said a lot of things, and I know he said so many memes about him on social media, etc. He said a lot of stuff. I'm not saying I agree with everything he said, but I agree with this. And he once mentioned something on his show where he was doing a show in Mexico, and he was talking about Mexican food and all that. And he mentioned that, of course, Mexican food is one of the most admired culinary countries in the world, but at the same time is one of the most misunderstood food in the world. And I totally abide by that, because I always say, I don't know if that would be your case in where you live, Monica, but here in the United States, in my experience, if you almost in any setting, whether it's, of course, if you're surrounded by Mexicans, that's not an issue. But if you're surrounded by people from local people who are non-Mexicans, and you ask them, do you like Mexican food? I would say at least I would be comfortable to say that 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, will raise a hand and say, yes, I like Mexican food. Now you
It's
start scratching on the surface on that answer. The reality is that they have no idea what Mexican food is. There is a perception of what Mexican food is that is very different from reality. Now, that is one of the things that I think personally have changed dramatically in the past, in my experience, at least in the United States, in the past 20 years. I think the sophistication of not all, but a large number of people in the United States about understanding what really Mexican food is and what the distinction particularly is between Mexican food and Tex-Mex, for example, is a lot stronger. It has really
It is,
changed
yeah.
a lot in the past 20 years. 20 years ago, I mean, they had no idea about the difference between Tex-Mex and Mexican food. And I do strongly believe that a lot more people, it's a lot wider, it's a lot deeper now. So that is a great thing. That is a great thing. And I see it, for example, when it probably happens to you also. You don't need to be a diplomat for this, but when I meet some people, a lot of people, and say, "Oh, you're Mexican. Yeah, can you recommend a Mexican restaurant?"
Yes,
Yeah,
of course. Yeah, they ask
yeah,
me this
I
all
get
the
that a lot.
time.
I get that a lot. So there used to be a time. I might be obnoxious because of this, but there used to be a time, both here in Atlanta and in some of my previous postings in the US, when somebody asked me that, my answer would be, you want the real answer or you want the polite answer? Because the real answer would be, there's no good Mexican restaurants here, in my opinion,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And people would be very disappointed, when I would say something like that. But that has changed. That has changed. And I've seen the change happen. I've seen the change happen in large cities. For example, here in the South, I can talk about Atlanta, obviously, which I know well. I've been here for a long time. But in places like Nashville and other cities in the United States, of course, New York is New York. But even cities that are perceived as not as sophisticated as a place like New York or Los Angeles, which of course we would expect that to happen there. But in a city like Atlanta, there's been a tremendous evolution. And there are several places, for example, here that have opened up in the past probably 6, 7 years, maybe, that are very respectful of what the real Mexican food is. They're looking to be respectful in terms of the ingredients. Of course, they can't replicate perfect what is done in Mexico for several reasons, but they do a strong effort to do it. And they try to portray themselves as best as possible as the representatives of an authentic Mexican food, Mexican culinary and culinary traditions. And so I think there's been a tremendous forward movement in that sense.
You just reminded me of a series on Netflix called The Taco Chronicles. I don't know
Yeah,
if you've seen it. Yes. Okay.
yeah,
So
of course.
it really encapsulates. So you just said that things have evolved and it's becoming more authentic, but it comes from a need from the diaspora members or first, second generation Mexicans who it just didn't exist. So
True.
what you're supposed to do, you start your own then.
I think, I mean, of course, it has to do with, of course, with our diaspora, with our community abroad, that they, of course, they started creating their own demand for real Mexican food. And of course, they started sharing that with the rest of the community in the United States in many ways. So in many ways, they started educating them about what the real Mexican food is about. So I totally agree with you, I think. And the other very strong thing that, of course, I would probably not the last 20 years, but it's also is very powerful, is that at least in the United States, I don't know about the UK, but at least in the United States, Mexican food is mainstream. Mexican food is not exotic. It's not something you do go to an exotic place to. It's totally mainstream. It is as mainstream as Italian food or French food. So going out and eating tacos is as mainstream as going out and having pizza, which might sound obvious to a lot of people, but it wasn't obvious for a long time. That was not the case a few decades ago. So that creates a very different platform, and it has to do with the power of our cultural identity that opens these doors all over the world.
I don't know about you, but I always find myself ended when I have conversations with Mexicans, I always end up talking about food. Always.
It's true. It's kind
It's
of.
a common theme.
I just did it. We were talking about talk about cultural presence in general, and I went right into the food thing, of course. But I can
Fascinating.
also tell you a little bit of in terms of general cultural. Of course, there's been also tremendous impact and I would probably say, I don't know that I don't know if there's what is the right term to use, but I would call it basically the Frida Kahlo phenomenon,
Oh, yes. Very
because of
popular.
course it is an explosion. It became an explosion in the past, again, probably 25 years, maybe more. Of course, Frida has always been there. She's been there for, I don't know, several decades, of course,
Yeah.
and there's nothing new about her. but the way she has been embraced by women around the world because of what she represents and everything has been a tremendous cultural phenomenon all over the world. I think to a certain extent, not so positive in the sense that I personally think that not enough people around the world understand that there's a lot more in Mexican artistic expression than Frida Kahlo. We do have a lot more than that. But again, I mean, it's positive because it opens the doors. So there's a lot of examples like that also
Yes.
in other areas of very powerful members of the Mexican cultural expression like her that have opened doors all over the world.
Thank you, Javier. We're reaching the end. It went so fast. We have talked about the past, the present, and I would like your insight on the future. What's the future of Mexico in the global stage? What are your predictions? I'm sure you have some predictions. You've been in a diplomatic mission for so long, and you probably can forecast where is Mexico going to be in the next 20 years or 30 years. What is going to happen at the global stage?
Well, I mean, Mexico is very much a part of what we are and where we are, and that's not going to change. And when I say where we are, well, we are in North America. We are
Yeah.
the neighbors of the largest economy in the world, and that's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't really matter what happens here in the United States in November in the next election, and of course, and we have gone through elections too in our country, and different political perspectives change from time to time. But when you're a career diplomat, you learn to see things in a little bit of a larger distance. So what I'm trying to say with all of that is that Mexico is and will be part of the North American economy in the future. It's not a choice. It's not really something we have to choose. It is what we are, and it is what we will be at least in the foreseeable future. So, which means is that, and the other factors that's very important, and a lot of people talk about it in economic and trade circles, is the regionalization of trade. Until, for example, the pandemic and other geopolitical factors that are around related particularly to the dispute and the growing confrontation, political and economic confrontation that's going on, particularly between the West, the United States first, but not only the United States and China. That involves that what used to be in the past a global supply chain that was going on all around the world to promote and to support production, manufacturing, is disappearing into more regional production and supply chains, which basically means that, for example, a lot of the manufacturing that is going on in North America, particularly, for example, in the United States, a lot of the supplies that used to come from the other side of the Pacific Ocean, from China, particularly, not only China, but particularly China, are being substituted from suppliers closer to home because it's safer and because you don't want to rely on another country that geopolitically you're not in very good relations with, and you want to bring it closer. So that regionalization is an inescapable trend, and Mexico is very much a part of it. So economically, our future will be in North America, and that's probably happened to. You see that in North America, you have South America, and on the other sense, of course, the European Union is kind of doing the same things, and a lot of the economies in the Pacific are also moving in that sense. So that's kind of the trend. If you ask, I don't know if that got your question right, but that's how I see Mexico moving forward as part of that, and having a stronger voice in the future, because this trend will certainly impact Mexico's economics and hopefully support the economic development of the country in a more distributed way, because we have very, very highly industrialized parts of the country, particularly in the north, that have engaged with this economic model, but we haven't been able to connect into that all of the country, particularly in the south of the country, where there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of people who are suffering of lack of access to education, etc., etc. So we need to work on that, and that's part of what the Mexican government is talking about, as you know, a lot, particularly the incoming government.
Thank you for sharing that, Javier. I am interested, obviously, I always keep an eye on my home country. And of course, I think most Mexicans' wish is to go back to Mexico one day, at least. I would love that at some point. And so it's good to know what your insights are. Is there anything you would like, some parting words for an audience? Maybe wish everyone Happy Independence Day. I don't know if we say that. It's a Viva Mexico. That's what we
Yeah,
say.
of course. I mean, we do it a lot of them. We're just starting all of our Independence Day celebrations here around. We're gonna have an intense next few weeks here going on. And one of the things I always say to people whether I'm in a stage in front of 1,000 people or whether I'm in a smaller group of people talking to our Mexican community, one of the things I always tell them is that they should be very proud of who they are. They should be very proud of being Mexican. They should be very proud of what their parents, their ancestors did. We are a country that is deeply admired around the world for a lot of the things that we have done and the things that we have shared with the world. Things like chocolate, like vanilla, like our food. I came back into food again.
Yes, your common
But
theme.
our music, etc., etc. So we should be very proud of who we are, where we come from, but we also should be very proud of where we're going. And those Mexicans who do not live in Mexico, particularly who are part of a diaspora, I always tell them also you should also be very proud of what you're doing where you're living, and you should engage where you are, and you can do both things. Because I think the mistake would be for some people to think that it involves a choice. That if I set up roots in let's say in Georgia or in Texas or in California, and I become active here, and maybe I get also American citizenship and I vote in American elections, then I'm betraying my Mexican roots. No, you're not. No, you're not. You can do both, and you should do both. Fortunately, Mexico embraces binationality, and we want a binational, empowered community all around the world. But of course, they are empowered where they live, that they are part of that community where they live, whether it's economically or even in terms of their civic activities, but also that they are empowered towards Mexico because the Mexican nation does not stop in our borders; they're everywhere.